Welcome to the show. My name is Labron Allen. I am the founder of the Natural Health Clinic, and today we're going to discuss don't be a victim of your DNA. We're going to talk about how you actually have far more power over what happens with your DNA than anyone has ever told you, and probably more than you've ever imagined. So stay tuned. We'll discuss all of this right after this. Welcome back. So pretty much everyone, maybe even including yourself, when they think about DNA, they think that basically it means they are predisposed or even predestined to have certain problems with their health. If their great-grandmother, their mother had heart disease, so too they think they will very likely have heart disease. And that applies for hypertension or diabetes or being fat. So pretty much that sets everyone up to be a victim of some kind of health issue. But is that really true? Well, quite possibly not, and I think that when we have concluded the end of this presentation, you might also hold that perception to be true as well. So let's first off talk about the human genome. So a few decades ago, there was the Human Genome Project. Now, they knew that there was about 150,000 controlling or behavioral proteins. So they expected to find about 150,000 genes. However, that did not happen. So you may wonder how many genes they found in the Human Genome Project. And the answer is they only found 23,000. So that is a far cry from 150,000 of what they were expecting. So that shows the framework, the scientific theory of the human genome was extremely, incalculably wrong. So too, even though, or I should say, once they found these 23,000 genes, they even started talking about junk DNA. Do you remember that many years ago, junk DNA? Well, what that simply meant is that they had no idea what that DNA did, and so since they're so incredibly super intelligent and understand everything in the entire universe, obviously it's just junk DNA since they don't know what it's for. Well, that is obviously not true, and in fact, the human genome and how the genes function is so incredible that it truly does, as I alluded to earlier, give you far more power over yourself and what your body does than you probably have imagined. So let's talk about the flow of gene function. So at the very top, there is a signal. And so what this signal does, and this signal can be either environmental or it can be internal, it sends the signal to these regulatory proteins, and the signal causes these proteins to move, which is to change their behavior, to have a reaction. And so they flow into the DNA, they affect the DNA, and then the DNA gives a message to RNA. And the RNA carries this message over to what are called ribosomes, and the ribosomes are like a factory that gets a product produced. And the product that these ribosomes produce are proteins, and the proteins of what affects the cell and every system, organ, gland of the body. So that is the flow. Now, what is part of this external and internal stresses? What has science found to be the factors that actually affect the DNA? Well, first of all, before I tell you what those three factors are, let's briefly discuss the regulatory protein. So we have the signal, the regulatory protein, the DNA, the RNA, and then the ribosomes producing different proteins. So this regulatory protein. Now, when you hear of birth defects, if you think about bad genetics, which are birth defects, it's actually in these regulatory proteins. So what that should mean is that if you are predisposed to a certain disease, like heart disease or diabetes or cancer, that you should have defective DNA, right? That there should be some issue within these regulatory proteins. Well, the fact is that only 5% of the world's population have deficits or dysfunctions within these regulatory proteins. What that means is that 95% of the world's population have perfectly good genes. They have perfectly good genetics. So then, why do people get disease? So then let's go back to what I was saying a moment ago as far as what affects the regulatory proteins. What affects the signals that what causes the regulatory proteins to move, to behave. So the first one is trauma, some type of trauma. Okay? And then the second one, which is very interesting that we deal with in nutrition response testing in the Total Health Improvement Program constantly, and that is toxins. And they can be either from an external or internal source. So in a standard nutritional examination that I would perform upon you, what we're looking for is the dysfunctional areas of the body. And then once we have found that, what we're going to identify from there is what may be inhibiting the cells to improve their function. So those things that could be inhibiting the cells from improving their function are food allergies or sensitivities. Because when the body and the immune system respond to the food in an incorrect manner, that produces toxic substances. The dysfunction in the metabolic state of foods that you're sensitive to, that produces internal toxins. The next thing we'll look for are infections. Infections cause toxicity. In the case of, for example, molds or fungus, they create mycotoxins, which are very neurologically toxic. They can toxify many systems of the body. Next, we look for what you would think of as toxins, such as heavy metals, different forms of chemicals that may be on our skin from cosmetics and clothing we wear, laundry detergent, soaps we use to clean our dishes, from the food, from the water we drink, from the air we breathe, from the soil we walk on, from everything, because there is a tremendous toxic load of chemicals in our environment. So those are all the things that we look for in the standard office visit, which means that if we can help the body remove them, then in effect we're changing your genetics. We're altering, and in that way altering your DNA. The next thing that we actually look for during a nutritional exam is the third factor of what can affect these regulatory proteins. That is stress, and especially emotional stress, emotional conflict and trauma. So we look for that in a nutritional examination. So that is thought is one of the main things that can affect the signals that the regulatory proteins respond to. And specifically, it is our perceptions of what's happening around us, internal perceptions. And of course, perception is based upon belief. So this is where a lot of this information that I'm sharing with you today has come from Dr. Bruce Lipton. He is a Stanford biology professor, I should say he was, a Stanford biology professor, and he wrote a book called Biology of Belief. So I highly recommend that book. It's very, very fascinating. Anyway, so our thought directly affects our genetics. So just think about that for a moment. Our thought affects our genetics. So what can we do to make sure that we have good thoughts? Because if we have good thoughts, we have good genetics. If we have bad thoughts, we have bad genetics. All right? So obviously we want to have good thoughts. So in working with patients, what I will do is first, the simplest, which is to use stress modification techniques. So that can be as simple as meditation, going outside in nature, bare feet to the ground, enjoying animals, being by the ocean, being on top of a mountain, enjoying nature. It can really soothe the mind and the body. From there, we can use different techniques. One is called emotion code. Emotion code allows us to identify what specific emotions may be affecting specific tissues or organs. And then from there, we can clear them, help the body remove them so that they are no longer affecting the expression of your DNA. And then we can even use different procedures such as hypnosis, which the entire idea of hypnosis is to help you change your perceptions of whatever it is that you're wanting to work on. And obviously, if you can change your perception, which is the thing that affects the signals that control the regulatory proteins, voila, you have just altered your DNA. So there's many things that can be done to help with expressions of disease within your genetics. So you are most certainly not a victim of your DNA. In fact, you, whether you know it or not, are controlling your DNA. Let's just briefly consider thought a little bit more with a few examples. So, for example, you have probably seen individuals who are more optimistic, so we're not talking about ridiculous exuberance where it doesn't matter what happens, they're just joyful. But overall, a person sees and perceives life more optimistically. And usually these individuals are happier, they have better relationships, they just seem to do better overall throughout life. It doesn't mean that they don't have any issues, but it does mean that when they do have issues, they tend to work through them well and on the other side continue living and enjoying their life. Now, on the other hand, you may have noted individuals who tend to be more negative, who tend to be more cynical, and you see basically the opposite, that problems can just completely and utterly destroy them, and they just overall have issues in their life, and their life is anything but enjoyable. So that shows how perception really affects things and affects their life. Now, if you want to look closer as far as how it affects the body, let's consider two types of individuals. One is a type of individual that really has purpose in life, really enjoys things that they do, and finds things to enjoy, and they just view age as a number, and the aging process as a number. And that just because you get older doesn't mean that you're no longer young. And those individuals, they physically look different. They'll move differently. They will age less rapidly, as opposed to an individual at 30 years old decides that now they're over the hill and they start having body aches and joint pain and fatigue, and they get fat and they just feel terrible, and they age rapidly and they get wrinkles and their hair starts turning gray, and they just go downhill from there because they're over the hill. So that means that they have changed, both cases have changed their DNA. One has sped things up and altered the behavioral protein, so now they have kind of bad genetics, and the other has good genetics because of the good thoughts and the good perception, belief. So that's just two examples that we can see on a fairly regular basis of how your thoughts and perceptions affect the body. So if you found this information interesting or helpful, if you can think of anyone that you know that would find this information interesting or helpful, I would really appreciate if you would share it on your timeline or to these individuals or even groups directly, or just like this video. The reason is that Facebook has pretty much censored us. They have disabled our ad account so we can no longer promote any live videos. They have shadow banned us so that very limited amounts of people see anything that we do. It doesn't matter if it's videos, posts. You know, we have 5,000 fans on our Facebook page, but anytime that I post, or even with videos, we only get like 100 people. If it's really good, it might be 600-700 people. So just think about that. That's less than 20%. So that means 80% never see what we do. And that is called shadow banning, all right? So I would really appreciate it. It would help us out a lot and help potentially those individuals that you share this information with. So thank you. And if you're interested in working with us, if you would like to see if we can work together and help you towards your health goals, maybe change and alter that DNA, then I invite you to an initial consultation. So the point of initial consultation is to identify if we can work together. And then if that is the case, if we are good fit, good match, then we will design a program and find out where there are dysfunctions within your body and create a plan to help you progress towards your health goals. Now, typically, that initial consultation is $299, but I'm going to do a special for a limited time, so just see the pertinent information that's going to be posted with this video. And you can have that initial consultation $100 off, so it's only $199. You'll have a link that you can schedule online, or if you'd like, you can call the office. I'll have that information as well. So once again, I hope you found this information helpful, interesting. If you have, please share, please like, and you have a great afternoon, and thank you for listening.